Mr. Chalmers here again with another video on teaching from home with the New Zealand curriculum during the COVID lockdown. Today I'm going to be targeting narrative writing. There's quite a lot of genres for writing, and in many ways they cross over a little bit in terms of the skills and some of the composition, but this is the one I'm going to target in particular today. So in terms of writing a story, I'm quite pleased how I felt like the techniques for specifically writing in a particular manner when I was at school probably didn't become intentional till mid-secondary school, maybe a bit earlier, and it feels like now the ideas are taught deliberately right from junior in primary school and working their way up. And I think it's important to understand, even with debate about the best way to do it or what we like or our personal preferences, the general idea around a narrative is, in Western literature, you have kind of the three acts, so three main parts to your story, and I'm going to add a link where you can see where we need tension. There's always tension in any narrative of an imminent problem that needs to be solved, and that's often portrayed in terms of a hero up against a villain, and usually seemingly impossible odds, and that leads its way towards the climax where we have the highest level of suspense in a story or movie, and there needs to be some sort of conclusion. Most viewers don't like to be left hanging with a non-concluded ending to a story, and so that's what they're going to be taught, is to structure their narrative with an introduction and three parts of the climax and a conclusion. And if you think about something like Star Wars, and you have that rolling thing at the beginning, and you go, that's interesting that it's there, and it feels like it could take up a lot of time, and what purpose does telling me the year in a universe that isn't this one? What purpose does that have? But basically, in established writing, they always need to tell you all those details of the how, when, why, what. So it's no different for the targets for a writer in school, is the teacher will be wanting them to make sure that they cover, for the reader's sake, who otherwise doesn't know, where are we? Is this the 15th century, or is it now, or is it in a parallel universe? And who are the characters? And if you don't describe what they look like at all, then the viewer, the reader, has to make that up in their mind, and you can leave a little bit to the imagination, but you don't want to leave too much. And that's where it comes to rendering the dynamic, giving the character dimension. You don't want the characters in your story to all be the same. And without guidance, we tend to, in our early years, just simply write about one thing that we're fascinated about. Particularly boys tend to write about whatever they're thinking about at the moment, even if it's not a good writing topic. And there can be no consciousness of that the characters need to act differently than each other, otherwise they're not really independent characters. And from that point, you start to see how, in a good mini-series or series, you see character development. So without any kind of change in the characters throughout the narrative on the timeline, the story can be a bit flat. And the other very interesting, important thing is a character, based on their personality definement, should act consistently with what that character is, unless they have like a turnaround. And you can see that with Star Wars, is Darth Vader is depicted as bad and evil, and then we see a turning point, and that is an important element to have the potential for in a narrative, is that characters can change and can change dramatically. So the Shakespeare, love him or hate him, the interesting thing about Shakespeare is he had this ability to write the story and include stuff about the characters, or at least pointers for the characters, while telling the story. So what that means is you can basically pick up a Shakespeare book, you can turn to a random page, and you can pick a line, a quote by one of the characters, and you can start to analyze what does that tell us about the character. It's an amazing ability to condense the more dramatic points of the character within as little as a single quote. And it's not an easy thing to achieve, but ideally for excellence in writing, you would be wanting to aim towards having that in the back of your mind as a child, writing to say, well, this character is character A and it's not character B, so in this situation, what does character A, what would they do in this situation? And the reader will basically subconsciously evaluate that and say, oh yes, of course, that's what I expected them to do. They'll actually get a degree of comfort from seeing that in the narrative. Whereas what can really wind the reader up is you're halfway through the story, you've got a character, and then situation comes up, and they just act completely out of character, and the writer of that has not given an explanation for why, and that angst the reader. They're like, why are they doing this? It's not consistent, doesn't make sense. And we build those blocks of understanding of how people and characters, we expect them to behave based on our own life. So essentially everything, including sci-fi, is viewed at from the lens of our own known existence. Even if you want to talk about aliens in another universe, if you don't compare that to humans and the existence that we're familiar with, the story, no one can really lock on to it because it's so unfamiliar. So there are some of the components of story writing, and even though it might be difficult to unpack those until your children are 13, 14, 15, 16, it's good to see that it's there in the background for teaching. And I think there's a little bit of a shift by the looks in the style of the narrative today, and I'll post a link to that, to whatever you prefer, whatever you think's best, to know that what they're heading towards in primary school teaching is fairly consistent with, they basically want all students to write under that platform, and to have just a bit of an understanding of the targets there could help to, if you're evaluating your child's writing, to know, like, I think you could just describe a little bit more about what's going on in the character's head, or I noticed that all of a sudden the character did this thing completely out of the blue, and what were you thinking when you wrote that? Like, is that deliberate, or would you say that's consistent with the character that you've been developing? And just, that can potentially take, I guess, good writing to great writing. Hope that's helpful. Have a great day. We'll see you later.